Good morning, y'all. We might have seen it no morning, but God knows all about it. We gotta put it in God's hand, but more people coming in, I hope. Good to feed each other here this morning. I'm gonna be leaving farm the 18th. Before we do that, we got any flavors for it.
Remember Sister Wilma, she's, on the road to Virginia as we speak. Her father had a really bad fall. So, Miss Wilma and her father.
How's Miss Kathy doing?
Up and down, I think she's about the same she was actually, so, appreciate her.
Brother Herbert called me this morning pretty early, and he's real sore. He can't be here this morning. He said he hated it, but he just couldn't be here. Faye, she's not doing good at all either, so let's pray for them. I was over at their house yesterday. Bless their heart. And I'm not putting them above nobody else, but boy, I tell you, they haven't tried. So, y'all pray.
There's Kathy too, she got to have surgery this month.
Kathy's gotta have surgery on the 31st.
Yeah.
This month, so remember her in your prayers.
Good to see Jake and Donna back with me this morning too. I talked to Richard, I think Wednesday or Thursday morning, and he's staying in because the VA told him to stay in, but not to get out in it right now. He's doing what the VA tells to, anyway. Anybody else?
Brother Herbert, remember my son Gary, one of the workers for his husband come down with coronavirus, so they had to test him out. Well, believe it or not, he is the only one that tested positive, when my son did, but he's got no signs whatsoever. They said they were gonna check him again in a few days to make sure that test was wrong.
Anybody else?
Brother Herbert, remember Shirley and Leon this morning. Also, I had 3 prayer requests while we were out. Shirley O'Kine, which is my next door neighbor's sister, has stage 4 colon cancer. And Pam Chubby has a brain tumor. And also there was one other one, I can't remember the name now. But just remember all 3 of them, they have major surgeries coming up.
How far Betty told me his mama in the hospital, and his sister been in the hospital. You know, we got a lot of people we need to pray for.
Amen.
It was getting worse and worse. We need to pray for the word and everything. So,
Brother
I don't think we're gonna be, God be back pretty soon.
He's got to say something.
Just mama, they had to call 911 because she couldn't get up. She couldn't get out of bed. And my sister's not strong enough to tote her. And they didn't even know what was wrong with her, still don't really. But they got her on some IVs and she's doing a little better in the hospital, but I don't think she's gonna be able to come back home. And there's nobody that can take care of her when she can't get up, you know, on her own. All of us too old, and so y'all pray for her.
Yeah.
Also, I like y'all remember my cousin's son, Drake Tally. He is in South Carolina and had to go to the hospital, and he has the COVID-19 virus. He's 22.
I'll be glad that Coleman get out of here.
Me too.
Herbert, the little boy that I requested prayer for on several occasions, he had 2 rounds of chemo, and then they do another PET scan, and they did not give him cancer. They're waiting now to see what all has to be done. He's 7 years old. Been fighting this for about 2 years.
Yeah.
My neighbor called me this morning and asked me to request prayer for her nephew. He was in a car wreck on 285 last night, and they had to life flight his friend to Emory, and he's in Kennesaw. So remember them, and remember Wes. He don't understand why he can't get out, why he can't, so why I can't come visit him.
Yeah.
Just remember him.
Please also remember Robert Hamilton's brother, he's in ICU with this virus.
We got Eli back with it more too. It's good to see him back with us. Anybody that got one?
Herbert, remember me and Brittany both. We're struggling right now.
Anybody else? Fund 18 begin with the foot above. I will love thee, Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I will trust, my bow and the horn of my salvation and my high tower. I will call upon the Lord, who waters to request, for shall I be saved from my enemy. When that Jake had a play with it, but Jake.
Thank you, Lord, for coming to the Father. Thank you, Lord, for being back in your house once again. Lord, I thank you, Lord, for what you've done for us the last few weeks and what you're going to do one day after a while. We go through all the troubles and trials, Lord, let all be over. Lord, I pray that you bless the Sunday school this morning, bless 11 o'clock hour, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. We know y'all too.
Good morning, everybody. Well, a long list of prayer requests now, I guess maybe as long as we've ever had, and, you know, it's, for all we know, there goes another church member of the siren out there. We don't, you know, we don't know what's coming next for any of us, obviously, but it's a beautiful day the Lord has made, so let's celebrate that. I'm going to be teaching today out of Judges, and about a figure that I don't know that I have literally ever mentioned in any Sunday school lesson before, and yet really one of the better known names in the Bible to a lot of people, and that's Gideon. Gideon is looked upon as a great man of faith, a great servant of the Lord, did mighty works for the Lord back in the Old Testament. And yet, if you look at the origin of his service to God, it really, it wasn't just one of those automatic things. I think it's really tempting to look at the great, names in the Bible and say, well, that's, a beam of light just came down, and that person knew that, from never a doubt that they were supposed to do this for God and supposed to serve in such a way and to do these mighty works. There was never any question about that. They had 100% rock solid faith all the way through. I think it's easy to forget that these were just people. And people are not always 100% sure of what they're doing, even when it's the right thing. I mean, sometimes it can be hard to convince yourself that, hey, this is the way to go, this is the path to take. Not to say that they rebel against that or push back against it as much as they just aren't 100% certain to start with. And I think Gideon, in some ways, was one of those people. He ended up having great faith, but at the very front end of it, when God told him what he wanted him to do, he needed a sign. Actually, he needed more than one sign, as it turned out. But I just want to talk a little bit about who this person was, and I doubt we'll get very far into it this morning. And obviously next week we don't have class, so it may jump all the way to 2 weeks from now before we wrap up on this. I just don't know until we get into it a little farther. But I want to go to Judges chapter 6, and Judges in general is a book that I have not taught out of very much, and yet it is really, it has some of the better known figures, names, and events, if you will, in the Old Testament are in this book. So I'm going to start with Judges 6, verse 1, and we'll just read on through here because you kind of have to set the stage for who this person was. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian 7 years. And the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel, and because of the Midianites, the children of Israel made them the dens which are in the mountains and caves and strongholds. And so it was when Israel had sown that the Midianites came up, and the Amalekites and the children of the east, even they came up against them, and they encamped against them and destroyed the increase of the earth till thou come unto Gaza, and left no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep nor ox nor ass. For they came up with their cattle, and their tents, and they came as grasshoppers for multitude, for both they and their camels were without number, and they entered into the land to destroy it. And Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites, and the children of Israel cried unto the Lord. Now what had happened is, one of the many times, and Judges is full of these occasions, the Israelites had forgotten that God had rescued them from captivity and bondage in Egypt, and had taken them, out of that bad situation, given them their own area. And yet, because Israel was continually, rebelling against God and not doing God's will, God would periodically and fairly often, as it turned out, God would exact punishment on them to try to get their attention and get them to straighten up, and then so they would do His will and be obedient. But then they would do it for a while, then they would slide back again. So, in many ways, as we've often discussed, it's really just an illustration of what everybody goes through, which is you're up and down in your faith and your obedience to God, because again we're flesh and blood, and we fail sometimes. But Israel in particular was fairly frequently doing this, and in this case the Midianites had come in, and what would happen is, Israel, all the people scurried off, and they hid in these caves and these other places that they could find where they could kind of be left alone. But as soon as the crops were ready to harvest, here came the Midianites to harvest them. So, Israelites did all the work. Midianites came in and got all the stuff. So, as you can imagine, year after year, Israel didn't have much, because every time they grew something or expanded their herds or whatever, here came the Midianites to just skim it all off. And so for the Midianites, it was a pretty good deal. I mean, we're not having to do the work, but we're not having to make the investment, but we are getting the benefits from it. So God was using them in a way not to reward Midian as much as as we saw frequently in the Bible, he would use the evil people to teach lessons to his people and to make a point to them and to get their attention. And so in this case, Israel was crying out, "Oh Lord, you've abandoned us." Well, who did the abandoning? It wasn't God. God was right there the whole time, but the Israelites would keep slipping away, and then as soon as something bad happened to them, well, naturally, like people want to do, "Oh Lord, I'm being, you're not being faithful to me. You've abandoned me. You've done all these bad things to me. Why are you not watching out for me?" Well, God is merely trying to get your attention and say, "Look, you've slipped away, and I'm trying to show you that bad things happen when you do that." And that doesn't always mean that there's an invading army or that somebody's going to steal all your sheep, but it does mean that God is not pleased, and that we should expect bad things to happen when we don't follow the Lord. I mean, that's, what form they take and how long they last and how bad they are, that's up to God, but, they're there for a reason, and that reason is to correct us, if you will. And so what happened here was, it said in verse 7, "And it came to pass when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord because of the Midianites, that the Lord sent a prophet unto the children of Israel, which said unto them, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I brought you up from Egypt, and brought you forth out of the house of bondage, and I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of all that oppressed you, and drave them out from before you, and gave you their land." I did all these things for you. "And I said unto you, I am the Lord your God. Fear not the gods of the Amorites, in whose land ye dwell, but ye have not obeyed my voice. And there came an angel of the Lord, and sat under an oak which was an Ophrah, that pertained unto Joash the Abiezrite, and his son Gideon threshed wheat by the winepress to hide it from the Midianites." Now this is a pretty bad deal. A winepress is kind of a hole and kind of a thing made, obviously, to press the grapes and get the grape juice so you can make wine. Well, that isn't where you would normally be thrashing wheat to make flour out of. You normally would do that out in the open, where the wind would take the chaff away, and it wouldn't be choking the whole time on this dust while you're trying to thresh the wheat. But in this case, because the Midianites were always trying to steal everything the Israelites had and made, Gideon, the son of Joash, was in a wine press trying to thresh the wheat. Not a very pleasant experience, I'm sure, but that's what they were left with, okay? And so it says in verse 12, "And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him, and said unto him, The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor." Now, we wouldn't look at anything we've read so far about Gideon saying, "Well, this is a mighty man of valor. He's just another guy thrashing wheat," and in this case, kind of hiding out while he does it. But, clearly the angel of the Lord knew that this was a mighty man of valor. Whether Gideon yet knew it or not, the angel of the Lord did. It said, "And Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And where be all his miracles which our fathers told us of, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord hath forsaken us, and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites." So Gideon was of the same mindset, like, if this is God, then God, where you been? Why are we having all these problems? Where are these miracles like you used to perform? Well, what changed? It wasn't God, it was the people's hearts that changed, and thus he was just not pleased with them. "And the Lord looked upon him." Now this is where it's interesting. When it says angel of the Lord, we're not talking about Michael or Gabriel here. I think we're actually talking about this is God's Spirit of God himself because it says angel of the Lord, and then down here it says, and the Lord looked upon him in verse 14, and said, go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hands of the Midianites. Have not I sent thee? And he said unto him, O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. Well, who else was like that? Joseph? David? There were a lot of times in the Bible where the, quote, the lowly one or the run of the litter or the one that nobody expected to be the hero turned out to be the hero. Well, we're about to find out that this is the case with Gideon as well, okay? And the Lord said unto him, surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. Now, it must have been pretty hard to believe if you're Gideon thinking, I'm standing here threshing wheat in a wine press, hiding out from these Midianites who are just like the sands of the sea, you know, and there's so many of them, and they come and do what they want to with us, and here I am, and all of a sudden you're telling me that I'm this mighty man of valor, and that I'm going to be the hero, and that I'm going to help save the Israelites. That had to be, naturally, to any of us were to hear that out of thin air, we would like, you know, can this be the voice of God? Really? I mean, is this true? Is this actually going to happen? And so, again, you know, people being people, you'd have to say that clearly it wasn't very obvious to Gideon. He was starting to question this. It's like, why me? And again, who else did that? Moses, Noah. I mean, there were all these different people that in the Bible, it's like they got chosen by God, but it wasn't always obvious to them right away that they were the choice, that they were the one that should be taking this great order from God and then saving the people with it. And said in verse 17, and he said unto him, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then show me a sign that thou talkest with me. Depart not hence, I pray thee, until I come unto thee, and bring forth my present, and set it before thee. And he said, I will tarry until thou come again. And Gideon went in, and made ready a kid, and a young goat, and unleavened cakes of an ephah of flour. The flesh he put in a basket, and he put the broth in a pot, and brought it out unto him under the oak, and presented it. And the angel of God said unto him, take the flesh and the unleavened cakes, and lay them upon this rock, and pour out the broth. And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put forth the end of the staff that was in his hand, and touched the flesh and the unleavened cakes, and there rose up fire out of the rock, and consumed the flesh and the unleavened cakes. Then the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. Only last week we were talking about Aaron's two oldest sons who decided they would take a shortcut with God on this burnt offering, and that they would light it themselves with fire, and they of course got killed by fire in the process. So God has a certain way he wanted people to do his work. When he gave instructions, he intends them to be followed to the letter. Okay? And not just back in these ceremonial times like we think of back in those days, Leviticus, or, you know, somewhere back in there where in Exodus, where there's all these rituals and grand ceremonies related to how the people were to worship, especially with sacrifices. Well, in this case, Gideon makes his own sacrifice. He brings it out. The angel of the Lord literally puts his staff to it. The fire comes up and consumes it. Now, I would look at that as a pretty serious sign of who I was dealing with, and that they were legitimate, and that this the real deal, right? Who else can do that? Okay? But, you know, Gideon's going to take a little bit more convincing than just a mere, you know, fiery miracle, you know, here underneath this oak tree. And said, when, in verse 22, and when Gideon perceived that he was an angel of the Lord, Gideon said, alas, O Lord God, for because I have seen an angel of the Lord face to face. And the Lord said unto him, peace be unto thee, fear not, thou shalt not die. Then Gideon built an altar there unto the Lord, and called it Jehovah Shalom, unto this day. It is yet in Ophrah of the Abizarites, and that's still a place. This is a little bit south of, this is all happening a little bit south of Nazareth. If you want to kind of picture the Holy Land, this is a little bit south and a little bit west of Nazareth, not too far from Bethel. I think 5 or 6 miles from Bethel. And that, apparently this altar, some kind of rock altar is still there. Whether it's the same one or not, I don't know. But that at Ophrah of the Abizarites. So it said in verse 25, and it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, take thy father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal that thy father hath, and cut down the grove that is by it, and build an altar unto the Lord thy God upon the top of this rock in the ordered place, and take the second bullock, and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the grove which thou shalt cut down. So it's basically saying there were altars, there were idols, if you will, at this time, and that's of course part of what God was not happy about, was that Baal was still being worshipped, and Baal, as it turned out, was perceived to be this god that controlled the weather. Now we know that Baal doesn't even exist. That was just a figment of their imagination. But Baal, one of the things that they worshipped him for was because he's the one that would bring rain. Okay? And these people were having a hard enough time as it was, because when they grew anything or raised anything, the Midianites stole it. So, but they were constantly wanting somebody somewhere to send rain. And so they came up in their mind that, hey, Baal controls the weather. So we need to have idols of Baal, and we need to worship Baal, whether we're worshiping the real Jehovah or not, or Yahweh as they called him. People were worshiping both. Well, naturally, that's part of what God was mad about. And so here, where Gideon's father actually had, and again, it proves that, hey, it's not always that the great men of God are coming from great men of God. You know, we tend to think, oh, the preacher's son, he's going to be a preacher. His grandson, his grandpa was a preacher. His dad's a preacher. He's going to be a preacher. Well, that didn't work. I don't know if that's got a lot to do with who God calls. It works out that way a lot of times, but it's not. There's nothing in the Bible that says that that's how it works. In fact, there's more cases in the Bible where that's not the way it is. They just kind of spontaneously are chosen by God, as Gideon was, as Moses, as many others in the Bible were. Look at Paul. I mean, all these different people, the disciples, you know, for the most part, they were just people. Okay? And so here in the case of Gideon was a chosen great man and worker for God, although his dad was a worshiper of Baal. It was his altar, if you will, that God told Gideon to tear it down and to do something with it that was different than what he put up there before. In fact, he said, offer the burnt sacrifice with the wood of the grove which thou shalt cut down. Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants, and did as the Lord had said unto him. And so it was, because he feared his father's household and the men of the city, that he could not do it by day, that he did it by night. Now, his faith wasn't strong enough for him to just boldly go out there in the middle of the day and say, okay, here's what we're doing, and God sent me to do this. He decided the smart thing was for them to wait until night, kind of sneak in there and do it. Now, in reality, of course, you could say, what difference would that make? Because when it comes daylight again, people are going to know what happened, and they're going to probably figure out who did it. But his faith was not strong enough right away for him to go ahead and do it in daytime. But nonetheless, he did it. He did what God had told him. And when the men, in verse 28, and when the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was cast down, and the grove was cut down that was by it, and the second bullock was offered upon the altar that was built. And they said one to another, who hath done this thing? And when they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon the son of Joash hath done this thing. Then the men of the city said unto Joash, bring out thy son, that he may die, because he hath cast down the altar of Baal, and because he hath cut down the grove that was by it. So people are mad about it. They think, okay, we're going to have to punish Gideon, if you will, because he's basically made a mockery of Baal here. He's destroyed the altar of Baal, and you know he's got to pay for that. And then, however, this is where it's interesting. You know, Joash is going to defend his son, even though it was Joash's altar that was torn down by his son. It said, then the men of the city said unto Joash, bring out thy son, that he may die, because he has cut down the altar of Baal, and because he has cut down the grove that was beside it. And Joash said unto all that stood against him, will ye plead for Baal? Will ye save him? He that will plead for him, let him be put to death while it is yet morning. If he be a god, let him plead for himself, because one hath cast down his altar. This is kind of putting it out there and saying, okay, if Baal is real, if Baal is this powerful being, supernatural deity, Baal ought to be able to take care of himself. Shouldn't have to, you know, you guys shouldn't have to put, you know, Gideon to death, because Baal would be powerful enough to exact revenge on him himself. Let's just figure out if Baal can do that. Well, we've heard this before, right? If Baal can, you know, consume the altar with all the water on it and everything else, well, let's let him do it. And then you wait all day and he doesn't do it, and then God shows how it's done. Okay, so in this case, Baal, once again, was being exposed as nothing. Just this random thought people had in their mind that, oh, there's a God of the weather, and it's Baal, and it's just as real as Jehovah is. Okay, but we know that's not the case. And it's about to prove it here, because Joash is saying, look, let him, where is he? You know, where is Baal? Which is odd, because Joash himself had, you know, it basically was his altar, but yet when he realized, apparently God spoke to him and said, look, you know, you've been worshiping the wrong thing. And so he basically said, well, let's find out if the guy's real or not. It said in verse 32, therefore on that day he called him Jerubbaal, and this is talking about Gideon, saying, let Baal plead against him, because he hath thrown down his altar. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the children of the east were gathered together and went over and pitched in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and Abiezer was gathered after him. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also was gathered after him, and he sent messengers unto Asher, and upon Zebulun, and upon Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. And Gideon said unto God, if thou wilt save Israel by mine hand, as thou hast said, here's one of the famous stories from the Bible that people remember. Behold, I will put a fleece of wool in the floor, and if the dew be on the fleece only, and it be dry upon all the earth beside, then shall I know that thou wilt save Israel by mine hand, as thou hast said. Now he's already consumed his sacrifice under the oak tree that the angel of the Lord told him to prepare. He's already consumed that by fire, but now he's saying, well, if it's really what you want me to do, then put the dew on this fleece and not on the ground beside it, and then that'll be a sign that, you know, you're serious about this. And said, and it was so, for he rose up early on the morrow, and thrust the fleece together, and wring the dew out of the fleece, a bowl full of water. And Gideon said unto God, let not thine anger be hot against me, and I will speak but this once. Let me prove, I pray thee, but this once with the fleece. Let it now be dry only upon the fleece, and upon all the ground let there be dew. Just the opposite of what it was the night before. So he's testing God again, if you will. And God shows his mercy for sure here, because, you know, who are we to test God? Who are we to demand that God tell us anything or do anything, much less that he do something 3 times, 3 miracles in a row? However, God was merciful, and wanted to make a point with Gideon. So it said, and God did so that night, for it was dry upon the fleece only, and there was dew on all the ground. So what we have here is an example of kind of the Old Testament way, I think, of doing things, which was God sent a sign. Well, the sign sent later was Jesus. Jesus, and that's the last sign, really, even though Jesus did miracles here on earth for people to see that he was all powerful and that he was, in fact, part of the Godhead. It said later, well, we're not supposed to look now for miracles. You know, God showed me a sign. The sign comes from in here. You know, the sign is something that we're supposed to get through our connection and our faith through Jesus. And we've got the instructions already. We know what to do. You know, we don't have to put a fleece out on the ground and say, God will let it be wet on the fleece and dry on the ground, or the other way around, and keep showing me these signs. If you want me to go take this new job, well, show it to me in the clouds, or do some miraculous thing. I mean, that's not on God to do that. God doesn't have to do any of those things. If he does any of those things, it's not because it's required of him. He's doing it to be merciful, and he's making a point. But we can't go around expecting these miracles all day long just because we want God to prove something to us. You know, that's the Bible's full of this proof already, and we should know in our hearts that if God is real, if he's real, he's in our heart. And if he's not in our heart, then you're not on the right path to start with. So to me, if I look at all these stories like Gideon, and of course we know, we'll get into later what happened next with Gideon, because he turned out to be a very faithful guy. And in fact, to the point that if we go over into Hebrews, let me jump over here real quick. If we go over into Hebrews 11:32. Now this is an interesting thing here, because we have just heard the description really of a guy that he was faithful. He was doing what God wanted him to, and he was chosen by God to do these great things. However, as we can see, he didn't just automatically say, oh man, I'm the man of God. I'm going to do all these things, and I'll never look back and question any of it. But over in Hebrews 11:32 it said, and what shall I more say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon. It's spelled with an E instead of an I here, but it's the same person. And of Barak, and of Samson, and of Jephthah, of David also, and Samuel, and of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. Now, you can see that history has looked Bible history and all the later prophets and the disciples and the apostles, they looked favorably upon Gideon's faith and said he turned out to be a great man of God. And when you're mentioning the same verse with David and Samuel, I mean that's pretty good company, okay? Those are some of the greatest names in the Bible in terms of great men of faith, great men of God. And Gideon was counted among them as being one of those great men of faith. And yet we can see that it didn't necessarily start out that way, that he had to be convinced that God had a purpose for him and a plan. But we will see later as we get into it in another lesson, once he was convinced, he was a powerful worker for God, and he did not question anything at that point. He really moved forward and became a great leader. And Judges itself is, people ask where the name Judges comes from. These were not judges like we think of down at the courthouse today, okay, or even in the Supreme Court. These were great leaders called by God to do specific things for his kingdom. Gideon is a classic example of one of those judges, if you will, even though he was not born into a position of authority. Again, a guy that's out there, threshing wheat in a wine press, hiding out, is not, you can tell he didn't start out from high beginnings. I mean, he was just another lowly, regular guy. But just like Moses, just like many others, just like David, God had a purpose for him. God had a plan. And God had a way of showing him that that plan was real and that he would be there to support him if he would just walk in faith and continue to do what he told him to do. So hope y'all got something out of that this morning.
Thank you, Gordon, you enjoyed that this morning. Well, we ain't too bad, we in the twenties, that's pretty good, that better punch up. We got a birthday in the book. Funny, y'all don't have no birthday. I don't see nobody move. We stand to our feet, I'm gonna let Donnie get me with word of prayer.
Lord, we bow our heads to you this morning, thanks God that you permitted us, Lord, just to be this way. We appreciate this morning, man, that come to teach us this morning is very good.